Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street partners with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across the globe to develop community organising strategies and train leaders to build power from within their community. And in 2021, which is now halfway through, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to share their stories, inspire others, take action, give hope and organise communities for change. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Socially Democratic is also presented to you by Marist Blackburn Lawyers. Are you passionate about working in the law and providing access to justice? Marist Blackburn, Australia's leading plaintiff law firm, is looking for energetic, client-focused lawyers to join its road and work team across Reservoir, Dandenong, Ringwood and the CBD, the Melbourne office. Learn from a highly successful, collaborative and skilled work team working with a diverse client base with excellent career development opportunities. As I said before, the roles are based in either Reservoir, up in the north, Dandenong in the southeast, Ringwood in the east, or Melbourne right in the heart of the city. So go to marisblackburn.com.au/careers to apply. Be part of change and fight for fair. Apply now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that dives into the progressive campaigns and issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And today we are joined by a special guest, Jacinta Allan, who is the Minister for Transport, Infrastructure and a whole bunch of other things in the Victorian State Labor government. She's also the long-standing member for Bendigo East, a marginal regional seat that Jacinta's held since 1999. Jacinta's also the longest-serving woman minister in the history of the Victorian Parliament and also the longest-serving Labor minister in the history of the Victorian Parliament, which is an incredible record. Anyway, Jacinta's on today to talk. Basically, we're going to nerd out on transport infrastructure, but it's also been a while since we've had someone on to talk about COVID and the impacts that's having on the good people of Victoria, and nice to have someone from the Victorian State Government come on and talk to us about that, particularly since we're coming out of a bit of a lockdown. So JA's on the show today to talk about that and many other things. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Stitcher. And if you're an Apple Podcast user, leave us a rating and a review. And a couple of other things just to update as well. Last week we had my good buddy Sam Schneidman over in Brooklyn to talk about the New York City mayoral race, the Democratic primary, which is actually being counted at the moment. So we're taping this one on a Wednesday afternoon. It's 5 o'clock. 84% of the first round preferences have been counted. Eric Adams, who was the sort of the nominal front runner, has received 31% of the primary vote. Mayor Wiley, who was sort of the AOC endorsed sort of hard left candidate, has picked up 22.3% of the vote. Catherine Garcia, who I think Sam was a bit of a fan of, has picked up 19%. That's surprising that she's polled behind Wiley on primaries. Andrew Yang, who we all know ran in the Democratic presidential primaries last year, has got 11% of the vote, and then there's a whole bunch of other candidates sort of on 5 or lower. That's just the primary vote, and the ranked choice vote counts are not expected until the 29th of June. Oh my God, why is it taking so long to... This is exactly what we talked about on the podcast last week. They're going to start at the lowest candidate, which is Isaac Wright, that's polled 0.2% of the vote, or 1,913 votes at this point in time, and then eliminate him and then distribute his preferences to all other 18 candidates. I know that's why it's going to take them friggin' 3 days to do this, whereas they just should be eliminating everyone. And by the sounds of it, allocating preferences to Adams, Wiley, and maybe even Garcia, just to see if Garcia can get over the top of Wiley. Anyway, whatever. There you go. There's an update for the New York City mayoral race. And also thank you to Alice Workman, who writes for The Australian, the Struth, the gossip column in the Australian newspaper, that conservative paper that some people read these days, gave us a bit of a plug, which is lovely. Thank you. That really helped us. I actually genuinely appreciate that. So thank you, Alice, for giving us some free publicity. Okay, now to get all the updates of the podcast, don't forget to follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a Wednesday afternoon in a very cold, wintry Melbourne day, and joining me on the line, I'm not entirely sure actually where she is. Are you in Bendigo or in Melbourne?
Parliament sitting today, Stephen.
Look at that. Look how engaged I am with our democracy. She is the member for Bendigo East in the Victorian State Parliament. She's the minister for basically building all of the really good shit, and I don't know the name of the portfolio. It's something about transport infrastructure or something close to that. But more importantly, she's actually a Latrobe alumni, fellow Latrobe alumni and fellow Marist Brothers alumni. Jacinta Allan, welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thank you very much. I haven't, it's been a while since I've been introduced as a Marist Brother alumni and yes, a Latrobe alumni. So it's good to be with you.
It's a very good Venn diagram that you and I share. And that's basically the only reason I've got you on the show today, is just to sort of, talk about our old education days.
Well, I'd like to know if you ever played in the Marist Brothers brass band, because I did.
No, our school had the Marist Brothers in Warragul had no music department whatsoever.
Oh, we'll have to rectify that. We'll have to find you an instrument of sorts that we can get you on.
What instrument did you play in the Marist Brothers brass band?
Well, I actually played the tenor horn, which for those who know the brass instrument family, it's shaped like a tuba, but it's as the name suggests, it's the tenor of the size of the family. So it's a smaller instrument. I was never really much good at it. Didn't progress far beyond the second chair, but it was good fun and a really great social environment to be part of.
Was there ever a competition?
Oh yes, and I should point out the Marist Brothers brass band in Bendigo is actually an all ages band. So young people, few oldies as well. And yes, there's always competitions and Eisteddfods, and even competitions that you can travel the country to participate in should you have the resources and wish to do that. So it is. It's a great social engagement, and there is something about playing music as a group. It's like why people join choirs. It's why people join singing groups. Making music, performing together as a group. There is something really rewarding and collegiate about that experience.
Very, very collective as well. Those Labor values shining through at an early age, clearly.
Yes, absolutely. You're only as good as the person in the chair next to you.
Who was your big school rival when you were growing up in Bendigo?
Well, we were there's only one, there is now two, but at the time there was only one Catholic school in Bendigo. So our main rival was more at the VCE end, Bendigo Senior Secondary College, which is an outstanding VCE. It's the biggest VCE provider in the state, and it's an outstanding school. They were our main rival, and mostly centred around, as it did back in the early 90s, it centred around the boys' football games.
Yeah, that's not much different to the experience growing up in Warragul as well. In fact, I recall we used to, whenever like the big crucial games were happening that may have got Marist to qualify into sort of the next district or the next round, we all got out of school and could go and watch the game on the Oval. And I heard some teachers talking about that happening the other day, reflecting on what teachers would do to try and get out of teaching, and they would just send them out. And the teachers were going, oh God, if we try to pull that today, we'd get absolutely crucified, yada, yada, yada. But that happened all the time. That's such a 90s thing.
It is very much a 90s thing, getting the day off to watch the boys play footy.
Not the netball though, not the girls playing netball.
And thankfully now, it really is interesting, particularly in my community. I know it's happening everywhere, seeing, the rise of girls footy to really even up that score. And it does. It gets equal billing and equal footing in the media reporting and the way people participate, which is great.
Fantastic. All right. Now, the reason why I wanted to get you on today is I want my own personal update as to how the major infrastructure projects are going across this great state of ours and here in Victoria. The last time I spoke to you formally on a podcast was back in, I think, like mid 2018 when I was still a party official at head office. And we talked about, I think you just made the announcement about the Suburban Rail Loop, which we're all very excited about. So for those who are not from the great state of Victoria, maybe give our listeners a bit of an oversight about some of the major transport infrastructure projects that your department is working on and has been working on in the lifetime of this very successful Andrews Labor government.
Well, I'll try and be brief because there is a lot. It's a massive program. At the moment, it totals about $80 billion worth of projects. There's around 165 projects across the state. And if you can imagine, they range from suburban and regional road upgrades, so duplication of regional freeways and extensions of suburban roads, regional rail upgrades so we can run more regional passenger trains, extending suburban train lines and duplicating suburban train lines, all the way through to the bigger projects that are about fundamentally shifting and changing the way people will be able to move around the city and the state. And there's a couple of really big projects that we're working on now that will really have a significant long-term impact on transport movements. And remembering, of course, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about the jobs that are supported through this program, because just on our program alone, there's something like 18,000 direct jobs. And then when you go into the supply chain and the small businesses and the retail and the cleaning contracts that all work on our projects, it does have a strong multiplier effect. It's also about making sure that having a good transport connection means that you can have a better quality of outcome in terms of being able to access employment, access jobs, access a broader suite of education opportunities or health services. So that's a really big part of the program too. It's about improving transport connections to help people get to where they need to be able to go safely and easily. And particularly too, this is true in our investment in public transport. So the Metro Tunnel is a project that really, probably in some ways, the Metro Tunnel and level crossings removal program started our journey on investing in transport infrastructure. And I'm pleased to say our commitment to remove 75 level crossings by 2025 is well ahead of schedule. 46 have already been removed, and there's another 23 sites across the city, right across the suburbs of Melbourne, where works are underway. And the speed at which we've been able to do this is really a great credit to the workforce who are working around the clock on these projects. And to give you a sense of how quickly we're moving, those 46 level crossings have been removed in the last 6.5 years. In the previous decade before we came to office, only 7 level crossings had been removed over that period of time. So we really geared up the program and have been able to move really, really quickly. I've mentioned Metro Tunnel. Metro Tunnel is the construction of twin 9-kilometre tunnels and 5 underground stations that is happening right now beneath the city of Melbourne. And people, I think, know a lot about the Crossrail project in London, for example. This is quite analogous to what we're building here in Melbourne. By building the Metro Tunnel and connecting up our 2 very busy train lines to the north and the south of the city, means that we're creating more loop space underground, which means we can run more trains in and out of the city. The Metro Tunnel will give us the capacity to bring in 500,000 extra passengers during the peak period every single week. So that's a lot, and it's about supporting the movement of people. But also too, the new station locations are about opening up access in key strategic sites around Melbourne. And so if any people know Melbourne well, know that the Parkville area around the Comprehensive Cancer Centre, University of Melbourne, they know that area is a really important place where people go for medical and health and hospital services, the university education there, and the research that sits around that precinct. We're putting a train station in the middle of that. And that means that people will be able to get there much more easily in and out of that precinct on train services. Similarly too, we're putting a train station station near on St Kilda Road, near the Shrine of Remembrance, another really big and busy business precinct that means people can get to those areas much more quickly. And finally, just while I'm on a roll talking about the Metro Tunnel, also too, our announcement of the airport rail alignment, finally building a rail line to the airport. It's been talked about for such a long time, where that will connect into the Metro Tunnel. So we're going to be able to provide for people to get on and off at Melbourne Airport and come straight into the heart of the city and even beyond, because ultimately the Metro Tunnel line will connect up with the Cranbourne-Pakenham line. So it's about giving the most number of Victorians access to Melbourne's airport by rail services, which is why we've chosen to connect the airport through the Metro Tunnel project. I've tried, it's often better to use a map, Stephen, when we talk about these things. I don't know if I've been able to describe adequately the concept, but it's certainly, it's all about adding extra capacity to our train network that Melbourne and Victoria needs, and making sure we can make it easy for people to use and get around.
Just unpacking some of the three of the bigger centerpieces of the transport infrastructure project that the government's overseeing at the moment. Just to that point about the airport connection, my understanding was that certainly back in the Brax-Brumby era that there had been research or a business case to see whether or not you should actually run a direct line from the city out to the airport, and it came back that it wouldn't be profitable, or that it wouldn't be, I don't know, you know, economically it'd be a bit stupid. That's how I'd probably phrase it. That's why I'm not in policy. But even like thinking about catching the train from, my understanding was that the train line that runs from Brisbane CBD out to Brisbane Airport was originally set up by a private operator. They couldn't afford it. They ran at a loss, and eventually the state government had to buy it back. Has there been a business case now made that it is profitable for Melbourne to have I mean, it always makes sense to most citizens. They're like, why don't we have a bloody train line to the airport? But it seemed like government for a long time were hesitant to do this. Where was this turnaround? Why has there been a change in policy?
Yeah, so one of the key reasons why we chose the alignment we've chosen, I mentioned the Metro Tunnel. We did some work back in 2016, 2017, and I should at this point give a shout out to the federal government, because this is a joint project, jointly funded project, but it was also in terms of the development of that very question is, how do we deliver an airport rail connection that people will use? Because those examples that you've given previously were showing that people, for whatever reason, didn't, you gave the Brisbane example, it wasn't a service that was particularly at that point in time attracting passengers. And so when we looked at this really carefully, and we looked at the work that happened in the 2000s, the work that occurred under the Brax government period, we looked at the alignments. We then looked at what we were doing right now with the delivery of the current train network. And we saw that if we bought the alignment, because there's an existing rail reserve between Sunshine and the airport, if we connected up at Sunshine and brought the airport rail into the city, integrated into the existing network, it would maximise the number of people who could use it. Sunshine is and will be a really important hub for our regional network. It means that passengers on the Geelong, Ballarat and Bendigo lines will all be able to come in, interchange at Sunshine and go to the airport. Similarly too, as I said, by connecting into the Metro Tunnel, there will be along that whole rail line from Sunshine all the way out to Cranbourne and Pakenham, that's something like 30 odd stations where people will be able to jump on at their local station and get off at the airport, making it really, really easy for people, for families to use the airport. And that's really, I think, why we've been really pleased to get the support of the federal government for this alignment, because it means that it will make it easy for the most number of people to use it. And then for people who aren't living on that train line, they'll be able to catch the train with one interchange to be able to connect in by using the Metro tunnel line into Melbourne's airport. Again, these things sometimes need a map to be able to describe them, to show pictorially what I'm talking about. But I think I'm really confident that with the alignment that we've chosen, it's about making it easy for the most number of people. There'll be 5 CBD stations that people will be able to jump on and off and get out to the airport, and the rest of the network, regional and metropolitan and suburban passengers alike, will have a really easy connection and interchange into the airport. And I think for many people it'll be a really great choice for them, whether you're a business traveller or family. It's going to be a really great choice for getting to the airport.
The Melbourne Metro project reached a significant milestone just recently. My question was actually going to be, when is the tunnel going to be completely done all the way through? And then I thought I should do some research before I asked that question. And I discovered it was last month. This is huge. Are they, given that obviously, we've been operating under these conditions of dealing with COVID for the last 12, almost 15 months, how has that impacted on the construction of Melbourne Metro, even though you hit a big milestone last month?
Look, whether it was Melbourne Metro or any of our projects, level crossings, Mordialloc Freeway, just to regional rail upgrades, like what was really terrific to see during COVID, and there wasn't many things that were terrific during the period of last year, was the way in our big build program, which is what we described, the Transport Infrastructure Program, was the way that, yes, there were changes to workplaces and there were some levels of restrictions on what happened at the different sites, but the construction companies and the unions and the workforce all worked those issues through, and pretty broadly across the program we held time, which is really remarkable to say that. And indeed in the Metro Tunnel, the project is already a year ahead of schedule. We've been able to hold that and hopefully get ahead of that. I've mentioned level crossings, how they're ahead of schedule as well. But yes, last month, all 4 tunnel boring machines finished their work, which means we now have 2 9-kilometre tunnels that you can pretty much walk end to end through. And I must say, it's an amazing thing to be standing under you're standing, say, under Swanston Street, in this giant cavern that has been dug out. You can start to see the station boxes taking shape. You can see the platforms that you'll be standing on in a few years' time, getting on and off the trains. And this is all being constructed whilst above ground the city has been there's been very little disruption, and indeed some of the tunnelling in some of the locations is happening 1.5 metres below the city loop. So that's a really finely balanced piece of engineering, to have these giant tunnel boring machines churning away right under the existing operating train system. And so it was terrific to mark the end of tunnelling, and the workforce were just so damn proud of the work they'd done, and they should be, because it's a remarkable achievement to get to that stage. I should say there's a hell of a lot more work to be done. A lot of really complex kit out needs to happen. If you think about all the things that have to go into run an operating train network, the technology, the wiring, the electrical, the plumbing, the passenger screen doors, the passenger information displays, there's an awful amount more work to come, but it was a super milestone to reach. And it is pretty humbling to stand there in this giant underground cavern and to see the work that the workers have done, bringing remarkable skill. And remember too, they're working underground 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's a big commitment to the job.
I saw a touching video on your Instagram accounts that involved one of the boring machines. I think it was Joan. It must have been, because it's obviously named after the first woman Premier of the great state of Victoria, Joan Kerner, when it completed the Kensington to Town Hall League. And you invited Joan's husband, Ron, down to mark the moment. And just watching that clip, I couldn't help but also feel the pride. You mentioned before about the pride that the workers take from what they're doing, and what was accomplished at that moment. Just talk about the legacy that this project will have on the City of Melbourne going forward.
Yeah, well, it will absolutely, the legacy will be through being able to bring more people in and out of the city. And look, and I know there's a lot of conversations at the moment about how the CBD of Melbourne is doing it tough, and there's no doubt it is. And we know that as the city starts to rebuild and recover following the pandemic, one of the constraints that we had before COVID will be addressed through the delivery of Metro Tunnel, which is how do you get more people in and out of the city on the train network? Because we know, everyone knows instinctively what congestion on the roads looks like, and we know that we need to provide an alternative to people coming in and out of the city on cars. And, you know, there's a lot of investment going in cycling and walking infrastructure, which is great for people who can live within a cycling and walking proximity of the city. But we as I said, we will need in the future the ability to bring more people in and out of the city, but also to that point I made before about opening up access via heavy rail to key locations around the city as well. That's going to be the legacy, is that it means that people will be able to move more easily in and out of the city on public transport. It helps support those livability elements that people identify as a really important part of Melbourne's character. And again, it's about equity. It means that you can be, you know, a kid in Pakenham and be able to catch the train to Melbourne University. So it is also about some of those equity of outcomes that is going to be a really important legacy from the delivery of the Metro Tunnel.
You mentioned the level crossing removal program has been a raving success in the wider public, but particularly in the areas where these crossings have been removed by the state government. And let's not forget, if we could hark back to the glorious days of 2014 when the announcement of this program was marked with ridicule by both the media and the then Liberal state government. You know, I'm sure they're all feeling some sort of level of regret about that now, particularly when the Liberals then decided to come up with a policy about removing highly congested intersections, and I think it lasted about a day. What's been the key policy ingredients that make this program so successful?
I think, there's a few key things. One is we're doing what we said we'd do. And if you think back to 2014, and it's probably still true today, there's always a high level of cynicism around politics, politicians and commitments, and also to the space. Commitments in the infrastructure space are always pretty hotly contested. And so we've been able to deliver, level crossings, people hate them, first and foremost. You know, people hate being stuck at level crossings. And one of the things they hate about it is the ability of how long you're going to be stuck there for. So if you think about any parent who's has the daily joy of getting their kid to school, knows how hard it is just to get your kid out the door without let alone having to be stuck at a level crossing. You know, if you're a courier, for example, and time is your margin, being stuck at level crossings is a real financial burden for you. So people hate them because of that you just can't plan around when the boom gates will be coming up and down. And on some of them, I know from the ones that we removed on the Dandenong line, which was known as the Skyrail corridor, some of the level crossings along that part of around Oakley and Carnegie, they were down for up to 82 minutes in every 2-hour morning peak period. Like, that's a monstrous amount of time. And, you know, the obvious knock-ons in terms of local road congestion and the safety factors. You know, they are every point where you cross a train line presents safety issues, and because of the unpredictability, people were making too many risks with how they navigate level crossings. And so I think because people have been able to see we said we'd remove them and we started to remove them really quickly, I think that's part of the reason why it's been in the public sense quite successful, is they're very visible works. People can see the works happening, and as I said, they're commitments that we are delivering on in a very visible way. Also too, and this is important, it's employing a lot of people. Our level crossing program, removal program, employs thousands and thousands of people. And what's important is that it's not a one-off job. They have a pipeline of work. You know, we first made the commitment, as you said, in 2014. We've got a program out to 2025. So that's a 9-year program of work. So that's 9 years of certainty if you're working on these jobs. And I've spoken to many people who have worked at different level crossing sites around the city because of the way they're delivered. They just move from one to the next one. And so that's also has a flow-on effect more broadly in the community, and also too, and I'll finish on this point because I know I could talk about level crossings for a really long time. There's also, we do a huge amount of work in the supply chain. You know, the high vis, the men and women in high vis are the very visible part of the work we do. There's a huge supply chain that supports all of our program. And to give you a quick couple of examples, the level crossing removals relies on a lot of precast concrete segments, very large concrete segments. Well, there's a couple of factories now around Melbourne who have a certainty of work because they've got contracts on our program, which means they in turn employ more people. Because of the policy settings we have about engaging social enterprises, social enterprises who work with people with a disability, migrant women, Indigenous agencies, we have a deliberate policy of requiring our tenders to engage social enterprises. So they're also working on our program as well. So the flow-on effects from this dedicated program of level crossing removals is quite significant. And you mentioned legacy before. When they're gone, people just celebrate them because it means a whole lot of a better community amenity as a result.
I know, and it's true. I know, the Herald Sun tried in that campaign, that sort of AstroTurf campaign, trying to brand it as Skyrail as if that was a derogatory term. And I think we might have got a little bit wobbly about it at the time. But in the end, they branded it beautifully because people love it. They actually love it. And it looks impressive. Like, it looks legitimately amazing. Like it.
Yeah. Well, it also what, we understood, but it's taken others a little longer perhaps. When you remove the upgrade train line and elevate it, you're creating new space. And one of the things, and we've seen this through COVID, right? One of the things that people have come to cherish as a result of having to spend more time in and around their own suburb is the open space that they have available to them, whether it's a park or a playground. People cherish that. So what we've been able to do through the projects where we've elevated the line is we've created new open space. And that's meant that there's, new dog parks, dog walking parks. There's new playground equipment. There's huge places where people can gather as a result of removing these level crossings. So that's also brought a significant social benefit through the delivery of the level crossings by elevating the train line.
Not to mention removing existing boundaries that divide communities. Train lines, you can't just jump across a train line. We shouldn't anyway, jump across the train line. So by lifting it up as well, it also then brings communities together. Another point as well, which will probably piss the Tories off. I've got 3 or 4 mates that actually work on the project that I grew up at school with, all absolute rabid Tories, never voted Labor in their life. And they've said, we have got certainty in terms of work for the next, 10 years or however. And they quietly say to me, Stephen, I voted Labor the last election. Dan Andrews has kept me in a job. So, in the end, I don't really care. So there's an electoral benefit as well. Not that that's the reason why I did it in the first place. One thing I want to talk to you before we move on to COVID is the Suburban Rail Loop, which is a huge, now talk about legacy. This is amazing, right? So where are we up to with Suburban Rail Loop? Because I know it's a long-term project, but I just wanted to get an update from you about what's happening right now.
Yeah, Suburban Rail Loop, look, it is tremendously exciting, and it is a very large project, and if you think about connecting an orbital underground rail line in that sort of connecting the middle suburbs all around Melbourne, that's a big project. It's going to take many years to deliver, and with all these things, you've got to start somewhere. And so the progress we're making so far is we've been working very hard on all the planning work that needs to be done. There's been a huge amount of geotechnical drilling to be done to understand the ground conditions. There's 477 sites have been drilled so far, and this is really important, as I said, to understand the ground conditions. We're out talking to local communities. We're going through all the planning processes. There's an environmental effects statement process, the regulatory planning processes that will start off at the end of next year. But in last November's budget, we secured $2.2 billion in funding for the early works to start. And that will kick off next year. And that's what all that planning and geotechnical investigative work is gearing up to. It's all about informing the commencement of the early works that will kick off with, obviously, and the reason why we put together an early works package, and we've done that on the North East Link, we've done that on the Metro Tunnel, is to make it faster and quicker to get on with the major contract, because you've moved all the utilities, you've dealt with all the underground conditions ahead of the major contract coming through. But the Suburban Rail Loop is also, I think, what's captured people's attention and imagination about the project is, again, it's going to connect people to where they want to go. You know, at the moment, you can't catch the train to Monash University, to Deakin University in Burwood. You've got anyone who tries to travel in that north-south axis in the southeastern suburbs into the eastern suburbs, you can't do that very easily by public transport. And so we know that by providing this orbital connection where the stations will be, somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes apart, you'll be able to very quickly get to where you want to go, but also too that opportunity to get cars off the road. It will have quite an important factor in alleviating the car traffic, as well as delivering those rail services. And as you consider, I know a lot of people think about, well, how is Melbourne going to grow? How are we going to be sustainable? How are we going to retain that livability of the city and the state that we love so much? We know a big part of that solution, because we've seen it around the world, is continuing to invest in public transport and heavy rail services. That movement, mass transit movement, is what helps retain those factors. And the Suburban Rail Loop will certainly do that. So we're really gearing up on that project.
Turning to matters COVID, you're the first minister from the government to be on the podcast since COVID first hit our shores 15 months ago. And I just kind of want to get your reflections on this journey, because obviously the experience that Victorians have had with this virus are vastly different to the rest of the country, because of particularly the large lockdown that we all experienced through a large portion of last year. What's been sort of the main lessons for the government in terms of dealing with this? Think about when you first discovered or learnt about that this virus is now on our shores and now it's starting to spread and all that kind of stuff, and then how you're going to deal with it then fast forward to today. What have been the key takeaways for the government, how you reacted and acted to try and get ahead of dealing with this virus from a health perspective?
Look, that's a really challenging question to answer, because I think one of the if you're asking for takeouts or takeaways from the experience is it's not been a continuum of the same experience. It has, and in some ways it reflects, you could argue it reflects the way the virus has mutated and has itself changed. And we're dealing at the moment, we've been dealing with it here in Victoria. New South Wales are dealing with it in a more significant way at the moment with the Delta outbreak. What we knew last year, what the strain we had last year that was infectious and contagious, what we're dealing with 12 months later is a mutation that is even more contagious and even more infectious and causes even more infections once it runs away. And so I think that has been the challenge in responding to the COVID virus, is its unpredictability, the unpredictability about what we learn from each outbreak. We take those lessons forward, but then along comes Delta and it has, whatever times level of infectivity. And so that also think, well, how do we respond to this? And that's where, and I know some of the conservative types get a little tired of this, but that is where the health advice is first and foremost. And that is biggest lesson out of the pandemic is to follow the health advice. And you look back to where we were as a country in March, April last year, where particularly the premiers of Victoria and New South Wales said, we've got to get on top of this from a health perspective. And they did, and they drove that agenda through that National Cabinet framework. And Australia as a whole, yes, we've had outbreaks, and yes, we've borne the brunt of it, particularly here in Victoria, but that has been the success nationally, that we took a help. We understood that, to get back economically, to support communities, we have to get on top of the health challenge. And that has itself been challenging, particularly as the outbreaks, the numbers come down and we have to do that economic repair. There's no doubt there's a huge economic repair job that we need to do as a nation. But I think we can see from overseas how bigger and harder that economic repair is if you don't first and foremost address the health crisis. So that's probably continues to be the biggest lesson from the last 15. It feels a lot longer than 15 months.
I know. There's enough memes out there to making the joke that 2020 as a year didn't exist, and now it looks like 2021's also blurring into the same as
I think 2021 sometimes feels like it's just 2020.
Yeah, I know. Can we just exactly call it the 1 year and start again? A question a lot of Victorians would be asking themselves, and I know that talking to a lot of friends and family and that, they keep on sort of saying, this is the fourth lockdown. We're just coming out of our fourth lockdown since March last year. And I know that other states have had various forms of lockdowns, but, we've been in some significant ones. And the question I think a lot of Victorians are asking is, why us? Why does this keep happening to us? And I know that there was this narrative that was being pushed out by the conservative media last year that Victoria's contact tracing system, the health system shit, it's not up to scratch, yada, yada, yada. But that doesn't seem to be the prevailing view anymore. A lot of people are out there saying, well, no, actually, the contact tracing, Victoria is on top of it, if not leading the way. They've restructured their health system. They've got, there's a whole bunch of changes that they've made. Yet here we go again. We're back into a lockdown. And New South Wales, I think it was 16 new cases reported today. When we had 16 new reports reported before this lockdown, we acted reasonably quickly. New South Wales aren't doing that. Is it a case of is it just rotten luck? Are we very sickly people? Is it just because it's shit weather? Are our health advisors far more conservative? I mean, what's the difference here? Do you think? That's the question a lot of Victorians are asking ourselves.
Yeah, and look, it's a question we all ruminate on often, and I think it's a combination, and I'm reluctant to pin any one factor on the reason why, because again, the one thing as I said before, my biggest lesson from the last year and a half has been that it's the only thing that's predictable is the unpredictability of the virus, the way it moves, the way, in families, it can be a family of four, mum and daughter can have it, but dad and son don't get it. Like there's that randomness to it that's also really, really hard to explain. And so I think there is, I've seen some of the commentary and the speculation that Melbourne, as the way the city is, we're a much more mobile city, that, the claims that the public transport use is higher, that people move around the city and across the city in very different ways, to say that the Sydney example, you've mentioned the weather, you've mentioned, that there's, we have a really strong events calendar that means people do get out and about. I'm reluctant to pin it on any one reason. It's a bit like in a bushfire. Why does one house get burnt down and the next door neighbour doesn't? It's the unpredictability of, in that case, a natural disaster. In this case, we're dealing with the health crisis. And so I do say, though, that you're right, our contact tracing team, and I have the fortune of seeing this work up close, is we have an amazing, there are hundreds, thousands of people working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep our community safe during these outbreaks, and they deserve our respect and our praise. They certainly do not deserve the heap that gets piled on them by conservative politicians. It's really, really disappointing when those claims are made, because these are, men and women who are getting up every day, to work around the clock to keep us safe.
You talked about the inconsistency of the virus. I tell you what's also inconsistent, the reporting by the Murdoch media. Like 3 weeks ago when Jerome Weimar got up, who's the DepSec for the Department of Health in Victoria here, and said that the variant could be passed with a fleeting contact. And the Murdoch media lampooned him, saying Victoria, and I think the quote in the front page or the headline in the Australian newspaper was Victoria shows the world how to bungle a crisis. Next minute I'm reading in the Daily Tally after Gladys gets up and talks about the fleeting contact fears in Bondi cluster. The inconsistency of the media reporting is also something that's kind of annoying me, but you don't need to comment on that. What I do want to talk about is something I discovered over the course of or if you can, look, if you want to, you can if you like. I just wanted to have a kick at them mostly. One thing I noticed from this is that this government bats deep, because a lot of you guys really stepped up and we didn't really miss a beat over the course of this last lockdown. And I think that should be noted. And what do you think the strength of this government is in terms of dealing with the challenges that you talked about coming up every single day?
Yeah, I think, look, we're also looking forward to Daniel coming back, and it'll be so wonderful to welcome him back next week. And in saying that, James, as acting Premier, has been outstanding in the way he has stepped in. Remembering too, he's still doing his day job as Education and Mental Health Minister as well. He has been outstanding in the way he has led the government through this period of time. And I would like to think your observations about how government has kept ticking over and not missing a beat, I'd like to think that demonstrates that pre-pandemic and through this period of time, we've always operated as a team. And obviously modern politics has a focus around the leader and the personality of the leader. And I think that's well understood in modern politics. It's how it now rolls. But that doesn't, what we have always had under Daniel's leadership is that he enables the team. He supports his ministers. He encourages us and challenges us to bring forward ideas and policies and issues. And so we had already knitted together as a team a really strong level of collegiality and respect for each other that I think is one of the reasons that has sustained us through this period where Daniel has been recovering from really serious injuries. I think that's what sustained us, is that there's a level of collegiality and respect and depth that has carried us through.
And we're all looking forward to the great man coming back to work. Is it next week or the week after?
Next week, next Monday.
When you've come back from a long holiday, not that he's been on a holiday, but you just spend the first morning just trying to catch up with everyone and just wandering around everyone's desks and annoying them. He's going to be doing that to all of you guys, I'm convinced.
You don't think he's going to be clearing out the 100,000 emails that he's got backed up?
Yeah, maybe a bit of that as well. JA, it was lovely to see you today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your incredibly hectic schedule to come on the show today. I know you've actually got to run to another meeting right now, but we want to thank you for your time today and wish you the best of luck in such an important role, both continuing to get the state of Victoria running, but also dealing with this pandemic that is freaking us out on a daily basis.
It's great to talk to you, Stephen. Go well.
Cheers.